Great to be here. I'm excited to be here. I'm Scott. That's my wife, Kathy, and we are just thrilled to be here, mainly because we leave on vacation tomorrow morning, but most of all because we're here with you tonight. And, this is kind of an unusual morning. This morning I woke up and put a suit on, which doesn't happen very often, but I got a black suit and tie, and went to the beach because I had a wedding this morning. 9 o'clock in the morning, there's this young couple, Matthew and Grace. They stood in front of their friends, and they said, I do. For better, for worse, for richer or poor, in sickness and in health. And they're so young, but they're so excited. I was so excited for them. And it made me think back to about 30 years ago when this other young couple, this young, stupid husband and his amazing future wife, Scott Kirk and Kathy Naylor, stood up in front of our family and friends. And we said, I do, for better, for worse, for richer, for poor, in sickness and health. And if I'm honest with you, I was hoping for better, for richer, and for health. But God gave us a lot of both. And, but we had these dreams of what we were going to be and what it was going to look like and what our marriage was. We knew, at least I knew, it was not going to be perfect, but pretty close to perfect. And it wasn't going to be just like bliss, but it was going to be all kinds of happiness and about as happy as you can get. And over the 30 years, we realized that life is filled with lots of ups and downs and craziness. And if you're looking for how to have a love that works, how to have a marriage, how to have a relationship that works, we got good news. We're going to go to the Bible tonight because Scott and Kathy don't have the answers, but God does. And in Ephesians 5, he sets up this idea on how to move from your dream to reality. And I still have a dream. So I've got 3 grown kids now who are living out of the house. One of them come back, but they may all come back eventually. But we have 2 that are out, 1 that's back home studying for nursing school. But I have a dream. I have a dream that Kathy and we're going to grow old together. And I'm going there faster.
We already are growing old together, Scott.
But I dream of us kind of walking down the beach, hand in hand, kind of hobbling along, and taking shots off each other's oxygens, and just really kind of living the life that we want to have, of just really totally enjoying it. And so if you want to have that also, we're going to look at Ephesians chapter 5 tonight, and it talks about how to move from a dream to reality. And it starts with this verse. In verse 21 of chapter 5, Paul writes this: submit to one another out of reverence for Christ.
I have to say, when Scott said, hey, Kathy, do you want to speak at the Hills? And I said, great. And I said, what are we going to speak on? And he said, Ephesians 5. I thought, crud, I don't like that chapter of the Bible. And mainly because I am a headstrong, not quiet wife. And so this has been an area of challenge and growth over 30 years. But about 31 and a half years ago, Scott and I were looking to our future. And I was a young 19-year-old at that time. And Scott said, if we're going to even get engaged, we need to make sure, and so we need to go to counseling. So we went to pre-engagement counseling, and to make sure that that was going to be the right thing. And it was directly after a trip that we had to Maryland to visit my grandparents. Now, I idealized everything about our relationship, about Scott, and I just was living in not always reality. And so we were on this trip, and when you're on trips, you start to get to know one another more. And my grandparents are like incredibly formal, and I was always terrified of my grandfather. And so I was definitely a little uptight that trip. And at one point, we were walking Scott back to the guest room where he was staying, and he had this odd look on his face. And he ended up saying, Kathy, we got to talk. And I said, okay, what? And he said, I love you, but I don't know if I can marry you. And I said, why? And he said, because you bug the crap out of me. And you know what? For the last 31 years. And I finished that with,
I know that I also bug you.
Yeah. But you know what?
It was obvious.
And that is what's been happening. And our love for each other has grown in the differences that we share, in the times when we have butt heads, in the times when we have learned how to grow together. And it all comes down to when we went to this pre-engagement counseling, I told the pastor, I said, you know what? I don't really want, if we're going to get married, I really don't want that word submit in our vows. And I'll just pause it there.
So, what is love? You know, there's lots of great definitions, but there's also some strange definitions. I could say, I love my wife, and I could say I also love, mint chocolate chip ice cream, and that's obviously not even close to the same. But I can say I love this and I love that. Some people are going, why do I love ice cream, though? But what is love? And Paul talks about what love is. And basically, love is everything that I'm not naturally. That's what love is. It's everything that I'm not. Listen to 1 Corinthians 13. You hear it at weddings all the time. I read it this morning to Grace and Matthew. Love is patient. Love is kind. It does not envy. It does not boast. Love is not proud. It's not rude. It's not self-seeking. It's not easily angered. It keeps no records of wrong. Love does not delight in evil, but it rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. And love never fails. If you are doing a self-analysis test, how you doing? I'm doing pretty poor. I'm pretty good at the whole not delighting in evil and rejoicing with the truth. I'd win on that one. But there's a whole lot of others that I'm just a flat-out fail if you look at who Scott is naturally. Love is patient? Nope. Love is kind? It's a little easier for me to be kind than to be patient. But I'm not patient at all. It doesn't envy. It doesn't boast. Wrong. It's not proud. It's not rude. It's not self-seeking. It's not easily angered. Love is flat-out hard. Here's the reality, though. The Bible says, basic Bible stuff, that God is love. And so God is the one who gives love, and he's the one who wants to help us enjoy his love together. But it's everything that I'm not. And so that's a starting point of how we get this love that works and how to love well.
And that's where our pastor went and talked about love and said, Kathy, if Scott is loving you, why wouldn't you want him to protect you, and why wouldn't you trust him? And I learned in that time of what does it really mean when Paul writes, wives, submit to your husbands. What does that really mean? The word submit. Now, people have interpreted this verse in many different ways throughout generations. I truly believe that people have abused this verse and used this verse to abuse others. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. But I love this definition. To submit is to accept or yield to the authority or will of another person. It's to agree to refer a matter to someone else. There's a traffic circle in Carlsbad. I've learned how to navigate that one. But back in the day, Scott and I were youth pastors in Long Beach, and there's a giant traffic circle in Long Beach. And I cannot tell you how many times I almost got into an accident. And I'll never forget, the scariest time driving in that traffic circle was after we had just had our first baby, because the hospital was right on the corner. And as we are coming into the traffic circle and our brand new baby strapped in the back, all I could say is, stop, Scott, stop, Scott, stop. And we've almost gotten in an accident thanks to me, because I wasn't willing to trust him to yield when every other time he has yielded in the right way in that traffic circle. And that kind of sums up our marriage. But God has taught me what does it mean to yield, and that it's in my best interest so I don't hit head on into a crash.
So Paul says with his instructions on how to have a Christian marriage, how to have a Christian relationship that you'll want. And he says to couples, he says to individuals, he says this in Ephesians 5:21, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. Wives, submit to your own husbands as you do to the Lord. For the husband is the head of his wife, as Christ is the head of the church, his body, of which he is the Savior. Now, as a church submits to Christ, so also wives should submit to their husbands in everything. Husbands, love your wives, just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her, to make her holy, cleansing her by the washing with water through the word, and to present her to himself as a radiant church without stain or wrinkle or any other blemish, but holy and blameless. Verse 28 says, in the same way, husbands ought to love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. So you've heard what submission isn't. What is it? What's it look like? And there's when I talk about some things that it really is and how it's worked out in our lives, how it's continuing to work out, because we don't have it figured out yet, but we're working at it and we're getting better, and then we're falling back and moving forward again. But there are things that it definitely is, if you think about submission as really mutual respect and mutual trust. If I respect my wife, I will love her. If we trust each other, I'll be able to say, I'll submit to you. And that really is the biblical thing, right? He says, submit to one another. He starts it by saying, not just husbands have wives submit to you, which we'd all, maybe as guys, we'd like, but it's submit to one another. Put your spouse's interest above your own. Verse 21 says, submit to one another. So how do I put my wife's needs above my needs? It's a mutual trust and respect. It's having her best interests at heart. It's knowing that she has my best interests at heart. That's a great thing. That's an amazing, amazing comfort as a husband when my wife is looking out for me. There aren't a lot of people who look out for you probably. Maybe your parents, maybe not your parents. But to know that God gives you a partner who will look out for you and want your best, want you to succeed, that's an amazing gift that you can find nowhere else. I want what's best for Kate. And the great thing is, she wants what's best for me. That's a great place to live, where I'm looking out for her and she's looking out for me. And it works also with time and finances. You know, what I have is hers, and what she has is mine. We're partners together. So that mutual trust and that mutual respect. And it really kind of looks like also like teamwork. It's the Olympics. I've been watching the games. We're 2 days in. I've already overdosed on table tennis. Oh my gosh, what a crazy sport. Watching volleyball. I don't know if you play volleyball at all, but if you play two-man volleyball, two-person volleyball, there's a place where you serve that is a great place to serve, because usually when it's served there, neither one return the ball. You know what it's called? It's called the husband and wife spot. That's what they call it. That's the husband and wife spot. If you serve it between two partners and they don't communicate, it hits the sand and it's a point for the serving team. They call it literally the husband and wife spot. I don't want to have that spot in my marriage. I don't want to have a husband and wife spot where we don't communicate. And so it's teamwork. It's saying, I'm going to look out for you and care for you. Great teams have people who love the team more than they love themselves. Have you ever played with a great team? There's something awesome about being on a great team. I've also played with some great players. Guys who can go out and they can score 40 points. They can drop, you know that every night they're going to drop 30, 40 points. And then their team still loses. You ever seen that? A great team that has a player that scores 30, 40 points and they're a superstar. Everyone knows them, but their team has a losing record. I want my marriage to be the kind of thing where I don't need to score 40 points. I want us to win. And will it... Oftentimes, because my natural inclination is what's best for me. But if I realize that what's best for us, what's best for her, is best for me, that's when submission really gets working. When you have that mutual trust and respect, and you have that ability to work as a team. So it says this, in the same way as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her, husbands ought to love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. It's good to love your wife.
In our family, we love sports, and all three of our children were competitive athletes in their own area. And so teamwork was something that was super important to us. And I think sometimes some people will read Ephesians 5, verses 21 through 33, and see it where more it might be a coach to the entire team. The husband's the coach, the wife, the children, they are all the team. Or some might see it more, I'm the manager, I pay for everything, I do everything, and you just need to do exactly what I tell you to do. And I am so thankful that God brought Scott into my life, because in many ways we are co-captains, And yet how we operate, and again, I'm not the quiet. I always will say I'm not the quiet, and I'm challenged in the submissive area. And yet I know that when push comes to shove, God has anointed him with wisdom. And when we can't agree, that I can be able to say, okay, Scott, I'm going to trust you because you love all of us so well. And so with that, it also means that we have to think win-win. Some of you, I don't know if anybody has ever read the book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. It was a top New York seller. I also am a school counselor, and I work with students, and we talk about the 7 habits. But habit 4 is one of my favorite, think win-win. And when I tell students, I always say, it's not about you, but it's not about me. It is about we. And how do we work together to come to decisions? And that is really what I think the biblical submission is about, is being able to say, and that's what Paul's saying here, is we're going to love each other so well that we're not going to just look out for our own interests, but we're going to look out about what's best for us. And then in those moments when it's really hard to think win-win, I know that Scott's got our best interests at heart.
Let's be practical for a second. You probably in your life make 4 or 5 these major life decisions. You come to the fork in the road and have to choose to go one direction. That's a thing that'll change your life. Maybe it's going to college. Maybe it's who you're going to marry. It's what career you're going to take. It's being crazy enough to leave a PA job and to come to San Diego to be, well, we'll leave that one for later. But you get that life kind of decision where God lays it for you, and your decision doesn't just impact you, it impacts your family. So Kate, talk for a second. What's that look like? How's that look for the Kirks? And how does this passage here live itself out? What's it look like behind the curtains?
Well, I think back to a day when I was wallpapering. I was about 7 months pregnant with our second daughter, and I am wallpapering, and it was the cutest wallpaper. Hey, wallpaper is coming back in. I just want to let all of you know that. So, and I'm up on the ladder, and Scott comes in, and we have been youth pastors at this point for almost 10 years.
And life was great. It was an amazing life as youth pastors. We loved it. We told kids, hey, we're going to go whitewater rafting because I wanted to go whitewater rafting. It was a great time of life. We were loving it. We had a great team of leaders. Life couldn't have gotten much better than that.
And Scott comes in, and he has this look on his face. Now, I know that look. Now, God has gifted Scott to be a pioneer. And he is a dreamer and a visionary, and he will go wherever God calls him. And God has gifted me to be a settler and put wallpaper up on the wall and just make everything not necessarily peaceful at home, because I have a lot of chaos that brews around me. But when Scott came in with that look, I knew it was, oh, shoot, what is going to happen here? And so Scott said, Kathy, I just met with somebody who really wants to talk to us about church planning in Northern California and all of our families in Southern California. And I'm like, hold on, let me glue this last strip up here. And why would you even consider this? The answer is no.
She was also, how many months pregnant?
7.
Yeah.
And so God always has bottom line, we moved to Northern California. Another time, God all of a sudden started to stir in us that we were to move to Southern California 11 years ago. And in that, when we saw God opened up a position for me and we moved here, and then God was calling Scott to a raise your own support missions organization. And we were living in San Diego County. And I said,
because every missionary lives in San Diego, right? It's a great place
and I
to
just
raise
said, God,
support.
that's just ridiculous. And Scott, why would you even entertain it? The answer is no. Well, obviously, I have my heart changed because all of those things came true. And God has provided for us because God led Scott and God changed Kathy's heart.
So my job wasn't to say, submit, woman. That's not going to work in my family. It won't work in your family either, I hope. But it's for us to wrestle with it. It takes time and to work through and go, okay, what is God calling us to? Not just what what do I feel like he's calling me? What is he telling you? What are we working together? And it takes longer. It's more work to have that communication to say, what is it that God wants to do in those big decisions? You have maybe 4 or 5, maybe 10 of those in your lifetime. But there's also lots of little decisions that add up. And those are the ones that count the most, at least in my family. It's those little day-by-day decisions and how I treat my wife, how I love her, how I care for my kids, and how I live out what Paul wants me to live out. And he's very clear. He says that there are certain things that if you do this, this will stop you from having the marriage you want to have, having the relationship you want to have. And many of you may not be married yet going, okay, I'd like to put this on the shelf, but put it on the shelf and come back to it, because the way that you build relationships now with friends is how you'll have your best friend for your life. And so how do you build friendships, and how do you do this in marriage? There are some things that we want to talk about, 3 things quickly on what can stop you from living out this thing that Paul shares. The first thing is power struggles. Power struggle keep me from loving my wife. Power struggles keep me from submitting to her and her submitting to me and working together. I don't like power struggles, but I sure don't want to lose power struggles. And that's my problem. I don't know about you, that's my problem. But in our wedding, we got married in a church, and they had this nice candelabra up in the front. And when the wedding started, my mom walked up, and Kathy's mom walked up front, and they lit the outside candles. And there was one center candle in the middle that was left. And toward the end of our ceremony, we did this candle lighting ceremony that each of us took one of the candles, and we lit the center candle, symbolizing that we're no longer 2 but 1. And Fulton, who performed our ceremony, said, you used to be 2 individuals. You were capable of going anywhere you wanted to go and doing anything you wanted to do. You were an individual. But after this, you are now 1. And you'll share everything. You'll share joy. You'll share happiness. You'll share struggles. You'll share financial issues. You'll share everything. And that's God's gift to you. So light the inner candle and symbolize what God's doing in you. So what has to happen now daily is that I have the power struggle to realize that we're no longer 2 individuals, we're now 1. And what's best for Kate is also best for me. And what's best for me is also best for Kate. So can we live that life of what Paul says my responsibility as a husband is to love my wife as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. I can't do that. I can't do that. I can work at it, but I can't do that. But God can transform me to do that.
So power struggles, really wanting to be right, wanting it our way. But another thing that can stop us, and I think this stops people even in just relationships, is that we're all wired differently. Scott and I are wired incredibly differently. And some of us are more emotional, and we have this emotional reasoning, and some of us are more logical reasoning. If you think that you are a logical reasoning, like you are just like, yes, it has, like black and white, kind of, I know, I think first. I don't feel first, I think first. Okay. How many of you are maybe like me, and I am totally a feeler? I feel everything. I
love
feel
seeing
you
couples
right now.
with different hands. We're not alone.
Yeah. And that difference is how God wired us, but it doesn't always make for great decision making because it can be challenging. You know, Scott talks about loving me well. I don't know if outside of our chocolate lab, Scott ever needed to get another dog. And we have had many a dog. Because every time our friends had another baby, I needed another puppy. And so we had multiple dogs, and Scott would be like, do you really need this? But it's my emotional support dog, yes. And I struggle with depression, and our dog that we've kind of committed might be our last animal, which I don't know if
Last animal for now, let's be honest.
But because I think I need that connection. And Scott has been like, well, you know, when we go away, who's going to watch the dog? And do you know how much the vet bills are? And you know this. And he's very logical in how he has sought out things. But I think that creates tension in a marriage because we don't think alike. We don't always reason alike. And I don't know if you even have that sometimes in friendships when you all of a sudden, you have a friend that just want you to listen and empathize. And you're like, but I know what you can do to fix this problem. Because if you would just do this, this, and this, that problem would be fixed. But they don't want to hear it. I will oftentimes say, Scott, this is just when I need a hug. And I can sometimes tell it's so hard for him to say, but if you just do this, it would all be better. And so that difference in how God has wired individuals. Now, there used to be this traditionally men are one way, women are another way. And I don't think that's always the case. I think there can be some tendencies. But when you're in a relationship, you need to understand your friends. How do they reason? If you're married, your spouse, how do they reason? And be able to respect and love that part of them, not be annoyed by that part of them.
So a couple blocks is power struggles, this emotional and logical reasoning, and a third one we'll close with this is selfishness. If you're selfish, there's nothing quicker than to become unselfish than to have a child. Talk to any new mom, and it'll change selfishness in a heartbeat because you no longer do anything on your own time anymore. You don't eat when you want to eat. You don't sleep. You don't even go to the bathroom by yourself anymore. It just changes everything. In the same way, Paul says, that husbands ought to love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. He basically comes back and says, you know what? I want wives to submit to husbands. I want husbands to love their wife like Christ loved the church. And it's a great kind of work. When it works that way, you don't have to wonder if they're looking out for their own best interest because both of you are trying to serve the other person. But he comes back, and I love, he says, but let me tell you the truth. It's best for you to do this. It's great for your marriage, but it's also good for you. He said, he who loves his wife loves himself. If I love myself, and I love myself usually, if I love myself, it's best for me to love my wife. Because if I want to have a great life, I will love her. That's just what makes my life a great life. He says that you ought to love your wife like you love yourselves, because whoever loves his wife loves himself. After all, no one ever hated their own body, but they feed and care for their body just as Christ does for the church. So question, how might you serve your friends? What would it look like for you to look out for your friends and not just for yourself? What would it look like for you to look out for your spouse and not just yourself? Not to get the win, but to have a team win.
Scott shared that we are going on vacation tomorrow morning. That was a struggle for us. Because for the last 23, 24 years, we have always thought, what do the kids want to do? And as we celebrated our 30th anniversary, we're like, well, Jake's going to college and we need to pay, and I'm going to talk fast because it's about to rain. But then we finally said, you know what, we need to celebrate. But that was a struggle. And Scott, his heart is always for his family first, which is just so awesome. Why I'm so thankful. But as we come to wrap up, where are you at? How has God wired you? If you are single, I want to challenge you. Be praying. If you have a desire to one day be married, be praying. Because God has someone in store for you. But it's not about that person. It's about pray that God would prepare your heart, prepare you to be the partner that you need to be. If you have been married a short time, hold on to each other. But with your other hand, hold together the hand of Jesus. Scott and I would not make it 30 years without him. God wants to bless each and every one of you with relationship, whether it's a marriage or a friendship. But also, God needs to continue to change my heart. And so that is my prayer. Lord, continue to teach me what it means to submit before you, to submit to my husband, to love my family well.